And welcome back to my man cave. I'm not an expert, and today I'm going to do a video on how to adjust the dies on the Lead Pro 1000 for a 9mm round. One of the things I wanted to start out with is a gauge for your completed round. This is a Lyman, but a lot of different companies make them, and it checks the overall length and seating. But one of the more common things that people talk about is when you're done, it should do the plunk test. You can see there, it plunked in, dropped right out, plunk in and out. This is a Glock 19 barrel. It should do the same thing. You can hear it, it plunks in, plunks out. So when you're all done with your rounds, they should drop in, drop out, and in general not exceed the length of this. They should not be protruding out here. And also, after they do the plunk test, you should not be hitting anything up there. So the first stage, or the first die there, after you shoot this off, tremendous amount of pressure goes in here and widens out the brass. So you can see now it's not coming in or out there, it's actually getting caught in there. And there, now it's stuck in there and I can't get it out. So the first die is to reshape that piece of brass so you can get the plunk test out of it with a bare shell, and to pop the primer out of there, the used primer out of there. Here is a piece of brass that I just unstuck from the gauge. So I'm going to bring it back, forward. Now it's going to go up and decap and reform the brass. And you can see the primer's out of it, and it fits the plunk gauge. Drops in and out, no problem. So now I'll show you how to set the first gauge up here. It's very easy. First step in lining the first die, bring it all the way up. Make sure that it's all the way up as far as it'll go there, just not hanging. Bring this down until you feel it hit the die. Okay, so right there I can feel it hitting the die, or the die hitting the plate, I should say. Now bring this handle up, bring that handle up, turn the die 1/4 of a turn, and then this is a little bit hard to show with one hand on the camera, but I'm going to hold this, and with my other hand I'm going to rotate this down and hand tighten it. I'll do that in a second here. Now this is all set up here, and that's to there. The other thing, if you want to use the decapping pin, this is the decapping pin right in here for the 9mm. Set that flush and then tighten it down. You'll need to put a wrench on the bottom of the die and hold that, and then turn this. Theoretically, you tighten this enough so that if you have a normal primer in a normal shell, it will knock it out. If you have something like called a military piece of brass where the primer is almost welded into the brass, it's actually crimped. But anyways, that is a common source of breaking that little pin down here on the bottom. So you're supposed to have just enough tightness on this bolt here so it'll push a normal primer out. And if you hit something like a Berdan primer, this little rod here will come up instead of bending a little bit of that primer over there. That primer poker outer is pretty thin. Personally, I don't put this decapping pin in there. When I bring my brass back from the range, I have to put it in some type of sorting mechanism, And I found that this rail system is the best here because I'll line all my brass up here. And when I go from the side here, you can see this here. Here's a 380 right here. You can see it hangs down. You can just run your fingers across and feel when you get on that 380. And that's the way I sort my brass, all in a line there. Real easy to do. The other thing is, now that I have it here, I have a decapping pin in my drill press, and this goes along very quickly with two hands. Just put it in there, put it in there, and I'll show you in a second here how quickly I can go when I have both hands available. And I can also sense when this goes down. I can get a feel if I have a Verdun primer or a hard military crimped primer in there, and I can stop and get it out of the system. And so here's how fast I can go with this system. I just emptied out the few primers out of that depriming sled I just showed you, and you can see along with primers there's a tremendous amount of dirt and grit, and it's probably not a good idea to have that grit going into your press. It shouldn't hurt it, but on the other hand, it doesn't take very much grit in that press to start clogging things up, especially in the primer station. Also, after I decap my brass, I run it through a water system that has a little brass beads in it, and it cleans out the inside of the primer holes. So all in all, it gets a lot cleaner before I go into the press. I'll put a link down below for that depriming sled if you're interested in it. Also, I'll put a link down below for the stainless steel pin washing system with water. Now on to putting the second die in, which is a powder through die. In this station, the primer gets seated and the powder gets put through into the die, but also the top of the brass gets flared out so that in station 3 you can start to install the lead bullet. Okay, the first step in this is bring this all the way up, and you want to make sure that on the handle you keep a steady pressure on it because you don't want it floating up or down. And remember, station 1 actually controls the height of the stage here, so station 1 is what sets how far the stage will come up. So we'll be bringing the stage all the way up. So again, with this down and the knee lightly pushing on it, since I only have one hand to work this with the other hand holding the camera, I'm going to thread this all the way down. Okay, I just felt it hit the plate there. And I'm going to move it up one full turn. And then I'm going to put the camera down, grab this with one hand, and with the other hand tighten the nut down. Okay, we've got the factory flare here at the factory minimum, which is once you screw this down and it touches the plate with this all the way down. We brought this back up one full turn and locked it down into place. So now we're going to see if it puts enough of the flare on the case for us so we can seat a bullet. So the first stage there, it just reformed the brass. Now it's going back over to here, going up, all the way up, and it comes around over to here. We're going to pull it out of here and see if it has enough of a flare for us. Yeah. This is the factory minimum. You can see it's not really holding it as much as it's not really holding it as much as I'd like. the lead here still wants to pivot around. So I'm gonna, from my experience, I know that I usually want to bring that die down 1/4 of a turn and then lock it back down. So I'm gonna do that off camera and we'll test it again. So I've turned the powder through die down 1/4 of a turn and re-tightened it. Hand tighten it and make sure after every time that this is down all the way to, there's this little knurled knob that has to be tight every time to get a good reading. So now I'm going to put a sharp piece of brass that's been deprimed going up into the reforming. And now we're going to bring it up into the flare and powder through a priming station and bring it on around. And to make it a little bit easier on myself here, I'll bring it over here and set it down. So putting the brass down on a flat surface here, and I'll put my bullet on top. And now you can see it has a nice enough flare there that retains a little bit, but not enough flare that it's breaking away from the edges. So that would be a good flare for me. So I might come over here and mark these dies for future reference, knowing that this is where I like them to be. The last die to set is in station 3, and it's the crimp die and the bullet seating depth die. I found a cutaway view of this die on the internet, and so this is the part, would be this part right here with the threads on it. Pulling this out, there's an insert here, and that would be the orange shaded area. Down here would be the bullet, and here is the brass shell, and here would be the case of the die right here. So as this shell comes up, it actually hits a ring on the inside of the die. So there's a lip, excuse me, there's a lip that goes around the inside of the die here. And if I flip this over, you can see right here, it's a very noticeable lip on the inside. So that's what sets your length there on that. So then when this is coming down, it's pushing this in here, and pushing the bullet down into here and setting a length. So there's two things going on. The length, overall length of your bullet is getting set. And if you remember in station 2, these walls were flared out. So now it's pushing this down into there, and it's crimping the flare that you put on the top to hold the bullet into position. And seating depth, it's going to vary. These are all 9mm bullets here. You can see all the different variations out on the market. So the overall length is going to vary depending on what type of bullet you put in there. And one of the things you can do is go to the loading manual. This is the Lee loading manual, and they have right here, I don't know if you can see that, overall length. They're calling it minimum overall length. They're not giving a maximum, but I would just use this as a target. And you can see their length is 1.14, 1.13, 1.125, 1.16, 1.16. There's an organization called SAMI that puts out an industry standard here. And if you wanted to, you could look them up on the internet and pull down their industry specifications for 9mm. But this is the industry specifications for a 9mm. And if you come down here, let's see if I can get this into focus. The maximum length you should ever have, a 9mm bullet, according to Sammy, is 1.169 inches, and the shortest is 1 inch. And whenever you're in doubt, that's the range. So whenever you're in doubt, again, you can go to a reloading manual and see what they're recommending for different bullets and different powders on the side here. I've showed you this gauge before, and so this checks that it's not exceeding the maximum length. So if you put that bullet in there and you come along and grab it with an indicator there, dial calipers, excuse me, you can see that that's 1.69, and so that's pretty much right on with the Sammy spec here of 1.169 maximum. I now have the Winchester factory round in there. I've checked it. Go to bring the ram all the way up. And again, putting my leg on there with a slight bit of pressure so it doesn't move on me. And I'm going to bring this down until I get a firm contact. And I've got a firm contact there. Now I'm going to lock the bottom one into place. Next step would be to put this part back into the top here and bring this down to seating to the correct length here. And make sure that's a firm set too. And now I'm going to try around all the way through and check it when I'm done. And of course, I'm only going to be trying one all the way through here. So first stage, up, round to second stage there, prime, up for flare and powder charge, and around, and you can see the powder's down in there. Put a bullet in place, and it's going to be up and seat and out. Check it for the plug test on my Glock 19. You can hear it goes in there nicely, dumps out nicely. Smith & Wesson Shield 9mm, and dumps out nicely. Now I'll put it into the pistol gauge. And you can see it doesn't catch on anything going across. Bring it around, and it's not poking out the bottom. And it's a tiny bit snug here, and that's okay, but it still pops out with a tiny little finger pressure on the end. So you can see I can barely put any finger pressure there. The most important plug test, though, plug test, would be on the barrels. And bringing in the gauge here, I'm at 1.162, and that doesn't give me much tolerance to being over a little bit, because you're always going to get a little bit of variation. So I think I'll bring the shortness in a little bit till I get it to about 1.15. So I will have to turn this in about 1/5 of a turn. And that looks about right there, and I'll run another one and check it. And it comes in at 1.156, so that's good enough for me. Okay, so that's how I set up my 9mm dies. I hope that helps you. If you have any questions or comments, leave them on down below, and thanks for watching.